Hello and welcome to the first Access Chat of 2021. We made it through 2020, and doesn't 2021 feel so different? We're delighted that we've got James Emmett with us today. James has been a star in the field of disability employment and has done some amazing work with major corporations, resulting in employment of some 80,000 persons with disabilities, and won lots of awards and plaudits. So, James, tell us about yourself and how you came to be in the field, the motivations, etc. And welcome,
Yeah,
welcome to
thank
being
you.
our first guest of
Awesome.
the
Yeah.
new year.
21, right? So thank you very much. Yeah, so Neil, thank you. So yeah, I have been in disability employment my whole life since I was 18 years old. On my summer after my freshman year in University of Wisconsin, I got a job as a job coach in my hometown of Manitowoc, Wisconsin. And ever since then, I've been in disability employment. I have a physical disability myself. I was born without a left hand. I have two daughters now with disabilities. So disability inclusion is my passion, my love, and I've had the fortune. And my first part of my career was really in the service side, working with organizations like Easter Seals and the ARC. But the last half of my career has been more on the company side, helping them build disability inclusion initiatives.
Excellent, thank you. So, I mean, obviously, this last year that we've just celebrated the end of has had huge changes and huge implications for employment in general. So, and we've as a collective talked about the potential for greater inclusion as an outcome of COVID and home working and flexible working. And we've seen large companies having to change and adopt new ways of working. What have you seen, because you're working with a lot of these large companies, how's that impacted the programs you're working on, and has that meant that there have been more companies knocking on your door saying, actually, now we want to engage with you?
Yep, it's a great question, and boy, 2020 was a year of change, and it really has been an interesting year for my company, for James Emmett Company, as we provide. We have, I think, what we were talking. I was just talking with my team. We're going to double our book of business by the middle of 2021 for two reasons, as you said, Neil. Number one, we have a lot of expertise in those essential businesses, right? The distribution, manufacturing, food production, and those companies in the United States, at least, it's kind of, we're calling it the Great Divide, right? We're saying there's this large unemployment, yet these companies can't find good workers who will stay with them, right? So for them, the essential businesses. And then, as you said, those companies now also other companies moving to in-home work and starting to think about accessibility and what inclusion means. As you start to think about that in-home work, those companies are coming to us too. So we're really excited about 21 because I think disability inclusion will have more and more of an impact on both essential businesses and those at-home, the companies that have at-home work, building, kind of into the business structure.
So, James, do you expect to see some developments in terms of the employment numbers of people with disabilities this year?
I do. I really do. I think, we're having, Antonio, we're having this interesting component of companies coming to us, and not just the large companies anymore. A lot in the United States, these mid-sized companies that employ somewhere between 1,000 and 5,000 people, who are saying, talk to us about disability inclusion, talk to us about the benefits, about the loyalty. What do we need to do to become more disability friendly, more accessible? So I really have hope, despite everything that's happened, I really have hope for more and more companies building disability inclusion as not just a program anymore, right? But really baking it into the way that they do business on a day-to-day basis.
Excellent. Go ahead.
We know that there have been plenty of comments on this topic, that the pandemic has triggered change, and our CIOs, CTOs who had projects that were somehow frozen in their organizations, suddenly everyone felt the need to move forward and improve the way our organizations work remotely. On that side, what changes have you observed, not only the people that you work more directly, but also in the market that you usually work?
Yeah, I think it's a great, because one of the questions we've been asking lately is, what does inclusion mean when you have a largely distributed workforce, right? What does that, when you have almost everybody working from home, how do people become included? How do you feel included? What are some of the things we need to do, like setting up structured workplaces at home with people with disabilities, helping them understand the rules of interaction on calls and meetings like this, right? Especially for folks maybe with invisible disabilities who may struggle with some of those social components. How do you set up the virtual world for not just with technology, accessible technology, yes, but also with the rules. So we're working with a lot of companies about creating those rules for not just the kind of the technical pieces of accessibility, but the conversational pieces and how we make sure everybody's included in that. And we're seeing a lot of companies starting to ask that question of, what does inclusion look like when you have a distributed workforce? I think that's still to be answered in 21 and beyond. But there's a lot of interesting potential there as well. And I think a lot of companies are going to that. How can we be as productive as possible with setting up structure in the home?
So I think that you know, we are definitely glass half full people on this, you know, in this group, and we see great potentiality. Let's not forget the negative impacts that it's had on our society as well, and our community, because the highest proportion of deaths, the impact on healthcare and services has been significant. But like you, I think that the change is not just driving in business, but I think that what we're seeing is a sea change within business and within policymakers to try and look at how we can be more inclusive and do stuff in a different way. So I think people are starting to question, you know, businesses are starting to question things like, well, you know, not only how do we be inclusive and what does inclusion mean, but what does success mean and how do we define our success? And should it only be financial metrics? Now, we don't already within Atos, which is the company that Antonio and I work for, we do parallel reporting. So we have a combined report. So we do financial and non-financial reporting and measures. And I think that is really important, but defining what those measures are also is really important, and having some kind of consensus on those measures is something that will really help drive stuff forward. So we do all of the major indices, you know, GRI, Dow Jones Sustainability Index, all of these sort of employer indexes and so on. And for the most part, they're lacking good questions on disability, and they're lacking any kind of decent structure around data for this kind of stuff. So I'd love your opinion about, you know, what are the things that we can measure that would allow companies to benchmark and start then creating that sort of groundswell and pressure and system to improve collectively.
Yeah, it's a great, Neil, and I think it's, you know, it's a great point of, right, we can't forget the impact that the pandemic is having on people with disabilities and the organizations that serve them, right? That's one of the things that has been, but you know, we're seeing, I think, to absolutely your point, right? There is the financial ROI of disability inclusion that includes reduced turnover and, you know, improved safety and at least equal productivity for folks. But I think there's a lot of things that go beyond that, as you said, and companies are looking, right? Engagement, right? The ability to look at true engagement of your workforce, right? Whether it's people with disabilities or people without disabilities, but looking at true engagement scores and how people feel a part of the brand. Again, not just from a financial standpoint, but from more of a togetherness part. So those engagement scores. I think, what some of the companies like yours and Microsoft and are also driving the change, and it's coming down now to the mid-sized companies, is bringing people with disabilities also helps you think about problems in a different way, right? And one of the things I hear from a lot of our companies, Neil, is when we start hiring people with disabilities, it seems like they run to the problems to solve them instead of running away from problems, right? And I think that's kind of a mentality too. So that those engagement scores, the way that, kind of the creativity, and sometimes those are hard to measure in the business world, but I think we're seeing that morale improvement. One of the last things we also see is a lot of times we see what we call a rally effect as companies start to hire people with disabilities. And what we mean by that is disability touches all of us, right? Whether we have a disability ourselves, a family member, a friend, and we're seeing more and more as companies go loud and proud to hire people with disabilities, site by site, there's this rally effect of kind of that morale improving, those engagement scores improving. So a lot of upside on that. But I agree that social ROI, I think, is something really to continue to take a look at within companies as we come back from the pandemic.
Well said, James. A very interesting conversation. I was wondering if we could just talk a little bit more, just to ground your work, because one thing in the United States, we are working to have impact on employment, but you really have had impact on employment. So I was wondering if you would just talk to the audience a little bit about some of the companies you've worked with and what they've done and some of the successes they've had, because we used to talk a lot in the United States. I don't hear it as much about the Walgreens success stories. And it's not that, they're not still being successful. I'm sure they are, but it was just at the time it was so revolutionary. So
yeah.
But the thing that I like about the story is that not only did Walgreens do it, but they learned from other corporations. I know Walgreens was positively impacted by work that Canon was doing, for example. And so one thing I love about the story is how the corporations learned from each other and then started helping each other. And I know you were a big part of that. I also want to say one more thing till I turn it over to you, is that another thing that I thought that was so powerful about you is that, and I'll tell a quick story, CVS, I was talking to CVS about accessibility, and they said, we really want to employ people with disabilities. And this was years ago, because they had seen the success that Walgreens had gotten, and they're a competitor. So that makes sense. But what they did was, here in Virginia, where I live, they put out a call and said, we want to employ people with disabilities. And then they had over 250 people contact them, service providers, and many of them would be from the same company. And they were just so overwhelmed by the volume of service providers. That's what we call them here in the United States, people that want to provide service to help you employ people with disabilities and things like that, that they were overwhelmed. And so I remember talking to Deb Russell, who had been very involved in Walgreens too. And I said, well, how did y'all handle that? And she said, oh, we found James Emmett, and he was really good, because what he did was, and I should let James explain this, from my perspective, what he did was he figured out how to be sort of the front person for the corporation so that he could filter those 250 people and only bring in. So that was something that was very new in the US. And I was just wondering if you would explain to the audience a little bit more about that process and how the companies helped each other. Thank you, James.
Yeah, so for us, the key word, and I think, Deborah, we've talked about this, is collaboration, right? Whether it's the United States or globally, there are so many people, great, talented people with disabilities out there who are stuck in our systems, right? And we need to collaborate with our corporations to help those people come forward and find the right job. And so for us at Walgreens, right, when we started in Anderson, South Carolina, which was the pilot distribution center, we found a lead provider, the county board, and then also the state vocational rehabilitation in South Carolina. And we worked with those two entities, but then we were able able to bring in Goodwill and Easter Seals and all the other local community organizations who all funneled candidates together. It wasn't one organization providing candidates, it was multiple. And what we've done since then, Deborah, is take that model and even think about it bigger, right? We've had some, and one of the most interesting statistics, I don't know if this is out there in a general sense, in the United States, the Postus Family Foundation, which is now understood.org, who we consult with, a couple of years ago, we did a study and we found that we call it the 90-10 rule. So actually 90% of eligible job seekers with disabilities in the United States, at least, are not in the disability system. That's right. So they're not being served by vocational rehabilitation or Easter Seals or the community organization. So part of building now our model is part of building sustainable pipelines with our corporate partners. Again, we've worked with Pepsi and UPS. We're right now working with Advance Auto across, for example, large employers, is not just partnering with vocational rehab, which is important, right? All those organizations, but we also have to go get the word out where people with disabilities are not in our traditional system, going to religious organizations, going to the YMCA, getting out on, you all are experts, getting the word out on social media and you need to build this combination of collaboration so that the word about opportunities gets to everybody with a disability. And so that's really been our focus of our work, Deborah, is really thinking about the multiplicity of places where candidates are, and let's go get them. Let's communicate that there's an opportunity within corporations that want to build, that value their skills. And that's really been the focus of our work over the last couple of years.
Gosh, that is so brilliant. And I knew that, but just the way you explained it, it's like, wow. You're right. It is the 90-10 rule, because my daughter had Down syndrome, but I didn't really feel that putting her in the voc rehab system was going to do anything for our family. So I went and found her a job, and then I brought voc rehab in. So that's such a powerful point. But I think Neil wants to comment on this too. So let me turn it over to him.
So for our international audience, I'm guessing that vocational rehab is your government-sponsored projects to get people into work, whether they, and I'm assuming that a lot of that came from the sort of medical system, but also some from, I'm guessing, military rehabilitation as well, right?
Yep, correct.
So yeah, okay, and so yes, there are similar programs around the globe, but yeah, and what we find is that, like you, most people who would qualify as being disabled don't use those systems. Maybe because they don't know about them. Maybe because the other thing is that they don't identify as being disabled. And so that really was leading on to the next point, was that actually self-identification of disabilities. So we employ loads of people with disabilities, and I know loads of people with disabilities in my own organization that are not, considered disabled employees because they've never declared it and haven't even self-ID'd or not officially self-ID'd. They're self-ID'd to some people, but then they're kind of half in, half out of the disability closet, if you like. So do you do work in that area as well to help companies build the kind of culture where employees feel confident to self-ID and then also access the additional benefits of those sort of vocational rehabilitation or government-funded services that can help them be, more effective employees, or the employer support them to be, better employees, if you like, or have a better quality of employment experience?
So it's a great, Neil, right? Self-identification. And for me, we throw the word self-identification around a lot in the field of disability inclusion, but we're still so in our infancy of helping companies understand how to build that culture to encourage self-identification, right? I've only seen a few kind of large scale, really successful self-ID campaigns, but yes, so we do Neil, work with our companies on messaging and really believe that and encourage all our companies to be loud and proud, right? To borrow from the LGBTQ community, be loud and proud from the very beginning about their disability efforts and their disability goals, to not, again, as you said, not just encourage candidates to come in, but all the people that are in that company, we want them with disabilities, we want them to come forward and be leaders. We want them to come forward and be a part of it. And just to give an example, as I said, we work with Advanced Auto and Advanced Auto Parts here in the United States, very large auto parts retailer. And my colleague, John Stoops, does a lot of what we call team member trainings, where we bring folks in from the stores or from the distribution centers who are working there. And we do 20 minutes on what this is and what the Disability Inclusion Initiative is. And almost, Neil, by a group, we typically bring in 20 to 30 people at a time, whether it's on, and we almost always get somebody saying, I have a learning disability, or I have a child with autism, or disclosing almost all the time. And what we realize is people just haven't been given that opportunity and discussed what's in it for them if they provide that disclosure. So yes, I think building internal capacity and culture is just as important as building the external referral sources, so that those two combine to really create kind of a disability and friendly environment. And it's a journey, right? It doesn't happen overnight, as you know, right? Especially in big companies, but it has to be a planful build. So it's a great call out.
Yeah. So in the UK, there's a scheme called Disability Confident, and there's various different levels that the companies can engage in, and you start off with sort of committed, and then you engage it, and then the point is, though, right, it's not just about confidence, it's about competence as well, right? And so it's very good to be confident that you're employing people with disabilities, but once you've got people through the door, or they're there, you still need to be have the infrastructure behind it to walk the talk. And I think that sometimes I feel that a lot of the initiatives that we see that talk a lot about employing people across the world, right? And this is not a UK, US thing, but there are a lot of disability inclusion initiatives that are more about numbers than they're quantitative rather than qualitative. So particularly in countries where there are quotas. Right, so it's like all about the numbers of people you employ rather than the quality of the jobs that they're getting, and careers, actually, because that's what I care about. I care about careers. It's important that people are employed. That's an absolute baseline, right? But beyond that, it's about you shouldn't be stuck in that entry-level job. So how do we systematically, as an industry, as a collective of industries, start moving away from thinking about giving people jobs is enough, to actually enabling this across the organizations, making sure that we have people who identify as disabled or as part of the community or as allies in leadership positions in large corporations, or playing thought leadership roles, or and having that opportunity to progress, because there's still this sort of soft bigotry of low expectations, quoting Kate Nash from Purple Space here, around disability, that means that once you're through the door, you might have got through the door, but then you're not really going anywhere. So how do we address some of that stuff?
Well, and I think that if sometimes in some of the companies in the United States, especially in my experience, sometimes companies are labeling disability jobs, to your point, right? Like there's a certain level of job that people with disabilities can work, and that's it. And then maybe not officially labeling it, but that's kind of the implicit message. And the first message to our companies listening, right, is every job, right, needs to be accessible and needs to be available, from the CEO to your entry level and everywhere in between. But I think, to your point, more importantly, we have to start measuring not just numbers in terms of hires, but how many folks have been promoted. What is the number? And that's one of our formula in our is not just number of folks retained, but number of folks promoted. And being able to support and watch those careers of people with disabilities within a company is so critical to the long-term success of that initiative, right? And having the experts, the external experts and the internal supporters, making sure that we're not just setting somebody in a facility and supporting them and then forgetting, right? We're watching and we're asking the question. We had a situation recently in one of our partners in one of our distribution companies where a gentleman who was deaf, he was the best worker and the fastest worker, but the question was, and he was ready to be the supervisor of that department, but then the question was, how does he communicate? Can we promote him and all that? And the answer is absolutely yes, right? He's the best worker, so let's figure out the communication structure that we need to make him the department supervisor, and now he is, right? And we build that, we can build that structure around that. Those type of things, companies need to be asked those questions of not how many people have you just hired, but how many people have you promoted? And most importantly, as pointedly, how many leaders with disabilities are in your company, right? What does that look like? We're so worried about representation at the leadership level in other diversities, but we've got to continue to focus on bringing leaders with disabilities into our companies or promoting them from within.
Yeah, I to kind of follow up on that, and I'm sorry to hog the mic. I think that there's a kind of almost duality of things going on. So there's still a management culture of sort of infallibility, and you must not admit any weakness.
Right.
So we know from looking at figures that there's quite a number of senior people that have a disability, but you wouldn't know now, and not just because they're hidden disabilities, but because they're deliberately hidden disabilities. Yep. That apart from the legal paperwork, it may have been disclosed to HR, but it's not something that they talk about in public. So they're not making it part of their management persona. So I think that there's some stuff around that, because at the moment there's either sort of the two tropes. It's it's the sort of poor disabled person, or it's the inspiration porn, and we need to normalize this, and the more that we can get people to talk about disability, their issues, because again, as we age and we have an aging population around the globe, more and more people are going to acquire, disabilities, impairments, or just generally the usual sort of having to wear glasses, being a bit stiff. That's part of life, and opening up about all of this stuff and being human actually makes us more relatable leaders. But I guess some of that sort of, it's a cultural thing, and not just a country cultural thing, but a management cultural thing. Yeah. So are there companies that you've worked with where they are displaying that kind of open leadership, that servant leadership? And then I'll shut up and I'll let Deborah have the final say.
Yeah, I mean, just recently, right, we in our work with Advance Auto, we're working with, there's several leaders who have either disclosed their disability or have been promoted up through the project into leadership, right? And talking about creating a culture, not just of accessibility acceptance, but beyond that, a true culture where disability inclusion is business as usual. That is just so critical, right? We had just last week, and I think pretty soon I'll be able to tell the story on this company. I don't want to, but just last week, one of our mid-sized manufacturers who we just engaged with had on our leadership, we did a 40-minute leadership disability awareness training, and their CEO, who has been their CEO for 20 years, came out and said, I have never said this before, but I have a learning disability, and that's one of my passions here. And right, it's that, as you're saying, having to and not just her, but anybody having to hide that culture from that culture of infallibility, right? We have to not just encourage disability inclusion at the entry level and secondary level, but that leadership level and the messages getting to those leaders. If that doesn't happen, things won't scale. So we've got to, as you're saying, Neil, continue to scale that component of leadership within company and folks with disabilities being critical to that. So I agree with what you just said. Just great points.
Fantastic. Deborah, did you want to follow up before we close? Or?
No, I'm good because James actually covered what I was going to say. So I'm just so impressed with his work, because the thing that I love about his work, as I say, no, I don't want to, and then I comment, but he's actually having impact. He's actually doing it. He's changing the world. And so that's why I appreciate him. So back over to you.
No, and that's a great story, by the way, about the CEO, because that moment is going to be an inflection point within the culture of that company.
Yep.
That will be the trigger for significant cultural change, because that kind of top-down leadership and openness gives the green light for other people in middle management and employees to feel safe, to be able to say those things.
Yep.
So that kind of leadership is super important. It's been really fantastic conversation. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A on Twitter on Tuesday, as we know are our community, because they were asking us where we were last week. Damn us for not doing an interview on New Year's Day.
And Christmas.
Yeah,
Christmas.
yeah, I know we had a long break this year. So, but hey, we're roaring to go for year 7 of Access Chat. We're only here and sustainable because we have the help of our partners and supporters like Barclays Access, MyClearText, and Microlink. So I need to say thank you to them. Thank you to our community. Thank you to our guests. And thank you, James. We really look forward to you joining us on Tuesday.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was awesome.